Welcome to FOXSOUL's Black Report with our continued coverage of justice for George Floyd and the trial of Derek Chauvin. I'm Romeo.
Hey there, I'm Brooke.
I'm Demi.
Melissa's out today.
On today's report, a Minnesota governor calls for a police reform hearing. Charges are filed against the former officer who killed Daunte Wright, and we have news on the Kenosha police officer who shot Jacob Blake.
We're also going to talk about police officer accountability with the mayor of Inglewood, California, James Butts. Plus, we'll have a breakdown of this year's National Action Network Conference with a very special guest.
Plus, we check in with civil rights attorney Sue Ann Robinson, who is in Minneapolis for an update of the Derek Chauvin murder trial. So, mates, we have all of that and so much more. So if you're ready, it's our voice and our truth. Let's get it.
To me, this reeks of conflict of interest.
Do we know if he actually waved a gun? We only hear one side of the story.
This just really did make me feel good that the justice system did what they needed to.
We're going to keep following this story, and we will have the latest for you. Former Brooklyn Center, Minnesota police officer Kim Potter has been charged with manslaughter for shooting and killing Daunte Wright. The state announced second-degree manslaughter charges, and authorities say Potter was taken into custody late this morning. The Hennepin County Medical Examiner's Office has designated Wright's death a homicide, citing a gunshot wound to the chest. He was 20 years old. Potter, on the other hand, has been with the police department 26 years. And really quickly, before we move on, I just want to say, some information that you may have talked about it yesterday, but that, I learned, and it's just really upsetting for me. So you may have seen it talked about that George Floyd's girlfriend was Daunte's teacher. Talked about that, I'm sure. And also the history of the fact that Fred Hampton's mother used to babysit Emmett Till, paired with today, learning that, remember in Virginia, we talked about the story, the military officer who was pepper sprayed. Yes. He called Eric Garner his uncle. Did you already touch on that?
So we did talk about the aunt, Daunte.
Eric Garner, right. So that's what I figured, the new news today. Just all of this pain, thinking about just in these families.
Yes.
That is a lot.
Thank you for that, bro.
All right, the Derek Chauvin murder trial resumed today with an expert witness backing the defense's contention that George Floyd died of cardiac arrest combined with illicit drugs in his body and not from a lack of oxygen while pinned to the pavement by the police now fired police officer for more than 9 minutes last spring. Chauvin is charged with second-degree unintentional murder, third-degree murder, and second-degree murder manslaughter in the death of George Floyd. But joining us now from Minneapolis is civil rights attorney Sue Ann Robinson. How are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you guys?
We are doing great. Thank you for joining us. Now, before we get into the trial, let's start with the arrest of former officer Kim Potter. The state announced second-degree manslaughter charges. Are these charges sufficient, or do you think more charges will be filed?
I don't think that anything is going to make up for the loss of a loved one, and especially such a young man, in his prime, obviously, on the rise of his life, 20 years old with a young child. But in this particular case, second-degree manslaughter is the best our current system of justice has to offer in a case like this. And so...
So can you explain to us what the burden of proof for second-degree manslaughter charges is?
Okay, so the burden of proof in a criminal case is always beyond a reasonable doubt. Second-degree manslaughter obviously is in a murder charge. It is between involuntary manslaughter. There is a culpability element, but it's still saying that she put Daunte in harm's way, and there isn't a mens rea of her having intent to kill, but her actions were so reckless that they caused his death. So we're dealing with the second-degree manslaughter charge every day, obviously, on the Chauvin trial.
Yeah.
Sorry to cut you off there. So, Ann, do you think these charges happen quickly? And also on that note, could you also talk about why you think it is we saw the body cam footage from this so quickly?
Right. I think that the gap is definitely closing in police excessive force cases, right? But we can all agree that if anyone else would have shot someone in front of a bunch of witnesses and on video, they probably would have not slept in their own bed that night. But I will give credit, where credit is due to the organizers in Minnesota and everyone working so hard on the ground in getting, putting pressure on Brooklyn Center to get the camera footage released quickly, and also to keep them moving and keep the pressure on top of them to bring charges in a shorter amount of time than we've seen recently.
Yeah, speaking of Brooklyn Center, curfew was called for the third night there. Has the arrest of Potter calmed the family and protesters in any way?
I think Daunte's family, is Potter's family calm? I don't know, but
no, the arrest of Potter. Do you think?
Oh, okay.
That,
has
yes.
it calmed Daunte's family?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think, you know, they're obviously still in shock and still dealing with a lot of emotions. I think they have less questions and more answers than they had on Monday. So it's a step in the right direction for sure. So I think to the extent that you can be calm when you just had a loved one taken away, they have more understanding of what occurred, and they understand the next steps in the process to seek justice for their son. So to the extent that gives them some sort of consolation at this time, then you know, they're more calm than they were certainly on Monday. In terms of the protesters, they made their demands clear. They wanted an arrest of this officer, and the officer has been placed under arrest. Her mugshot is out there. So I think since the organized the protesters' demands were met, there should be a decline in protests, but we'll see.
Yeah, we surely will. Sue Ann, thank you so much for checking in every day. We truly look forward to the knowledge that you have to give us. So let's talk today's proceedings. So the Hennepin County Judge Peter Cahill, he rejected a routine defense motion to acquit the former Minneapolis police officer. Of course, we're talking about Derek Chauvin. So a question that a lot of us have on the flip side, is it time for the defense to start thinking about a plea deal for Chauvin?
A plea deal? I don't know what they're thinking about, honestly. Right. You know, as I've been saying from the beginning, the best defense for him would have been to just say he blacked out and had some sort of episode and didn't realize what he was doing. I don't know what a plea would be at this time or what it would look like. I mean, he could consider it. The motion for acquittal, like you said, is just a procedural element in the case, and he just moved for it because he's supposed to, the defense attorney. I don't think the state has any gaping hole in their case and, you know, any lack of evidence that would have allowed the court to grant such a motion.
So speaking of motions, right, today the judge ruled that Maurice Hall will not take the stand. Of course, Hall was in the car with George Floyd when police first confronted him last May. He had made his intent to plead the fifth clear through his attorneys. So, Ann, I want to talk to you about the fact that, you know, rulings like this are important for all of us in the protection of our constitutional rights, correct?
Sure, absolutely. The attorney filed a motion to quash the subpoena that the state sent, that the defense sent to Maurice Hall. He was allegedly in the car and he didn't want to testify. The grounds for his motion was obviously, you know, him pleading the fifth, him saying that he didn't want to be forced to give incriminating statements against himself. So that motion would be held in camera or outside the presence of the jury, so that the court could basically get an offer of proof, like what kind of statements he was planning on saying, so that he could say, this is why I don't want to be forced to incriminate myself. And the court finding that he didn't have to testify basically tells you that he didn't have anything that was, one, relevant to the case, and certainly wasn't going to be exculpatory to Derek Chauvin. I think his role in the case is actually captured on video, mostly with when he's with Shawanda. It's captured on Bodycam. Mm-hmm. He's kind of just standing around and asking if he can leave the scene and things like that, trying to get George Floyd's phone out of the van. So to that extent, I don't think he would have added anything to the defense's case anyway.
So David Fowler, Dr. David Fowler, testified today. Let's take a look.
Can you summarize briefly what your opinions are in this case?
Yes. So in my opinion, Mr. Floyd had a sudden cardiac arrhythmia due to his atherosclerotic and hypertensive heart disease, or you can write that down multiple different ways, during his restraint and subdual by the police, or restraint by the police. And then his significant contributory conditions would be, since I've already put the heart disease in part 1, he would have the toxicology, the fentanyl and methamphetamine. There is exposure to a vehicle exhaust, so potentially carbon monoxide poisoning, or at least an effect from increased carbon monoxide in his bloodstream, and paraganglionoma, or the other natural disease process that he has. So all of those combined to cause Mr. Floyd's death.
All right.
So, Sue Ann, if I'm not mistaken, this was actually the first time that carbon monoxide was brought up as a contributing factor to Floyd's death. What did you think about that? Do you think that was a blow for the defense at all? What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think it was utter nonsense. I think it's, you know, it's characteristic of Eric Nelson's case for the last few days, you know, just kind of throwing things out there. Oh, it's carbon monoxide now. You know, and again, it goes to what I've been talking about for the last days, which is that Eric Nelson's job is to muddy the waters for the jury as much as possible, to have anything to say in closing argument, to have as reasonable doubt. Hey, Chuck E. Cheese could have stopped by and done it. You know, everything. It's actually embarrassing to watch. You know, the way that he's going about it. Sometimes it doesn't even seem like there's a plan to it, especially today when his witness, his expert is on the stand. And he's almost having to refresh his recollection. Like, don't you remember what, you know, what your own testimony was? And remember, I told you the dirty secret of trial is that you can pay an expert witness to say almost anything. What it's going to come down to is whether or not your witness has credibility and has integrity in their experience. And this witness couldn't have worse experience and a worse resume. He's currently the subject of litigation in the place where he formerly was the medical examiner for saying a Black man who was suffocated by police died of a heart attack right now.
Yeah, it's amazing.
So you couldn't choose a worse expert witness with a worse reputation, with a worse background. I guess the benefit of the jury being sequestered is that, you know, they're not going to have that information readily available. They're not permitted to Google and do stuff like that. But come on, you know, there's, out of all the witnesses, you know, expert witnesses, he gets someone that's in active litigation for lying or I won't say lying, excuse me, for saying the cause of death for someone who was suffocated was a heart attack, and a Black man. So, you know, I just think it's a blow to the case in that his expert witness doesn't have the chops to be respected as an expert.
Yeah, and the carbon monoxide, to me, that was such a stretch when I heard it. I was like, wow.
Caught you off guard, right?
Yeah, and I was just unbelievable. So overall, the defense witnesses, what do you think of them, including Dr. Fowler's and the ones that had the last couple of days? What are your thoughts overall?
Yeah, I think the defense is doing what they can to muddy the water and kind of throw things out there. Even having the witness come back and talk about excited delirium, something that has never been mentioned by any of the other witnesses or in the video or any of the experts. They just brought was it Nicole McKenzie back to talk about how they're trained on people who are under the influence and suddenly get superhuman strength. Just things to, you know, like I keep saying, muddying the water, red herring, so that in closing, they have something to argue to the jury and say is reasonable doubt and point to all these random things that they've thrown against the wall. You know, I think the writing's on the wall for Chauvin. I'm hopeful for that because I think the video, which is the most compelling piece of evidence, is very, very clear, and it's 9 minutes and 29 seconds long.
So, Ann, we've talked about this definitely as the state was presenting its case, and now as the defense is winding down. I'm curious if your thoughts have changed at all. Do you think Derek Chauvin will take the stand?
I think that one of the smartest things Eric Nelson could do is have Chauvin testify.
Really?
Because this entire case is going to boil down to his mens rea. At the time, he had his knee on George Floyd's neck. What was he thinking? Was he thinking that there was still a threat present? Was he thinking that George Floyd was going to stand up in his handcuffs and do something? Did he think he was in excited delirium? Because right now in our minds, we have him smirking with his hands in his pockets, and we've read into the way his eyes look, I'm killing him.
So, Ann, I'm curious. Oh, I don't want to cut you off. The Zoom always does that to us. Sorry about that, everyone at home. But I'm curious if you have kind of evolved on that, because you have been saying that he's the only person who can make that point in the case. As the defense has started going, do you feel even stronger? Like, oh, no, he has to.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think the standard victim blaming, let's make George Floyd out to be this bad guy that somehow deserved to be executed at curbside, it's not going to work in this case because you have a very diverse jury, and a jury that's experienced now, unfortunately, in police excessive force cases and the lack of accountability in those cases. And the fact that the usual defense is, I was afraid, even when there's no threat present, and that's obvious to the public. So I think that this case happens in a time in history where it's unfortunate for Chauvin, but great for the movement and for the culture and for police accountability and police excessive force cases. So I think, you know, day by day, as I see the defense's case just fall apart before their eyes, I think it's more likely that Chauvin should testify.
Mm-hmm. So, and I just wanted to ask you one more question here about Maurice Hall, because you kind of touched on it just a little bit. But today we saw, of course, that he still wants to invoke his Fifth Amendment right, and he doesn't want to, testify. But why do you think that there's so much pressure on his testimony? Do you think that there's something that we don't know about that? Because I feel like Shawanda Hill, she kind of told us everything that we needed to know that was going on in the car when the police, arrived at the car. Why do you think there's so much pressure for Maurice Hall to testify?
She did testify to everything that happened in the car. I think the idea behind trying to call someone like that who's saying, I may have done incriminating things in the vehicle, is to, again, victim shame. Oh, well, he's hanging out with someone that's doing wrong. So guilt by association. So therefore, if he's with someone that's doing something wrong, or something wrong occurred in the car in his presence, then again, he deserved to be executed at curbside. Obviously, Moores is not a medical witness. He can't testify to any of his medical conditions and all this stuff that they're claiming is their defense. So the only other lane that it fits in is, let's dig up, try to find dirt on the decedent, on George Floyd.
Thank you for that so much. And we appreciate you every day. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you tomorrow.